Hello and welcome to this new terrain breakdown in Gaia. Today we will take a look at this huge impact crater that covers the entirety of our terrain. This will also be the last video using Gaia 1.2 because the new Gaia 1.3 it's almost released. It is currently in the bleeding edge stage, but I found that it is already way faster and stable than this version here. Okay, so let's start as always from the terrain shape. Started out with a crater node, profile to impact because obviously it's an impact crater, not a volcanic one. Custom depth of 0.4 because by default it's not so deep. Inner scale 60%, which is a bit higher than the default scale. Inner scale it's the inner region of your crater. I'll show you real quick. Let me duplicate it. If I modify the inner scale, as you can see, it becomes smaller and thinner, while if I increase it, it's like this. You don't have much border, you have a lot of ground, which could be nice for certain terrains. After that, I placed a warp node because for me it was too uniform, so I simply changed the size. I set it to 13%, which is small but not very small. Obviously, the smaller the size, you will have more details going on for every area, while with a higher size, this ondulation will be less prominent, will be more sparse around the terrain. I then placed a zero border because after that I'm going to use the transform. If you don't use the zero border, you will get artifacts around your crater. For the mode, I choose square. By default it's set to precise, but I found that I always use the square. I also change the blur power to 5, and then come into play one of the most important node for this terrain, the transform, because I change the scale to 250%. By default is 100%, so basically the terrain is 2.5 times bigger than what we have here. And I also change the position because I don't want the crater to be centered on our little square, but I want it to be on the edge. So let me duplicate the transform so I'll show you what I mean. By default the scale is like this, okay? And also the position is like this. Now I want the crater to be way bigger, so I increase the scale. As you can see, it becomes bigger. In my case, 250. But by doing this, we have this depression, and we don't want that. So I moved the crater to the top right edge. And then simply position it however you want it. You can change the position to the one you like. In my case, I went for this one. But yeah, if you want more of that impact, you can move it toward the left. If you want more of this plate, you can move it to the right. Then shatter to simply collapse all the features and create a rocky looking terrain with a lot of soil drifting down. As you can see, I bump up the strength to 150% instead of 100, and the collapses, which means how much we are shattered, I increase it to almost the maximum, to 2. I tone down the intensity because I set it to 60%. By default, it is too strong. After that, I created two shear nodes. Shear adds small cracks onto the surface. Now for this one, I choose a folding value of 30%. For the second one, I disable the self-modulated mode, scale to 80, folding still 30%. I placed two shear nodes because the first one is for the asteroid itself, for this impact zone. I wanted the little cracks on the surface that almost looks like terraces, as you can see here, because I thought that the asteroid, when it fall down on the Earth, maybe it cracked in certain zones, stuff like that. So I think it looks cool. The second shear is for these plates. You can see we have these almost desiccated plates that surround our impact crater. I combine the two and we have this result here using the mean value to 100%. So we retain these cracks on the outer border while also retaining the details on our impact zone on the right. And finally, erosion. I went for a custom erosion here, duration to default, otherwise you get a lot of channeling and I don't want that. Rock softness to 20%, all the rocks remain hard and solid. I also toned down the strength a little bit, 40%, the default is 50 I think. Downcutting to 0 because I don't want channeling of like a river like structures flowing down. Inhibition 10% and also random sedimentation to 100%. Random sedimentation with a low inhibition value prevent the sediment to falling all the way down. They will stop here on the slope, more or less. And that's all for the erosion node. Of course, I mark it for export and also pin it. Before taking a look at the texturing process, let's go to the lake. This is our lake node. First of all, for the first input, I connect it to the erosion through a portal, because obviously that's the terrain we are working on, so the lakes must be inside the crater. And then for the rain mask, I created a custom mask here, as you can see. I simply painted out with the mouse, hand drawn, and these are the zones where the rainfall occurs. So basically it rains only here. The input of the mask is connected to the erosion portal. Now for our lakes node, precipitation to 80%, that's up to you. I didn't want to cover the entire crater with water, but if you want, you can create the precipitation, and if it's not enough, enable flood control, which basically gives you an ocean floor and you set the height. The lake's output, which means the mask, is connected to the blur node, because by default the mask is very sharp. I'll show you. Let me set it to 0. This is the default mask. It's not that bad. You can use it if you want. There are many people that use it as it is, but for my taste, I prefer this effect here, where the water like gradually dissipates towards the shore, and also you avoid artifacts by doing that. I marked it for export because we can use it as a water mask, and I also created the portal for our texturing process later. Regarding the depth output of the lakes, it's used for coloring. So for our albedo texture, I connected a warp because I wanted more variations for our water. I also enabled the auto level for this warp because otherwise you can't really see the mask, and also it gives a motion pattern to to your water, so it looks even better. Size, so 2%, because if you increase it, as you can see, it doesn't work, so you must use a very low value. A lot of iterations, 5. For some terrains, not this one, but other terrains I made, I also went with like 15 iterations and 2 warps node. It depends on what you are creating. The output is connected to the clutter to give the coloration of the water. And that is it for the lakes. Obviously the clutter, I made the portal because we will use it later for texturing purposes. Let's now take a look at the textures. For texturing, I used the texture data map, the slope, default settings, rock map, and I applied a blur. Same reason, because the rock map by default looks like squares. You can see if I zoom in, they look like squares. I don't like it. In cases they are okay, but yeah, like 90% of the time I just use the blur to get this kind of result here, and then an invert just in case I need the 2 mask. In this case I ended up using only the invert. And then we have the flow. The flow obviously is for masking out soil deposits or rivers. I use the secondary and tertiary flows. I then connected the secondary to a warp. This is our secondary, and by using the warp you give it you break that uniform that looks like CG or unrealistic. Same thing for the tertiary flows, same settings, just different seed. This is it. Okay, so let's take a look at the graph. First set map is just a reddish rocky looking set map. Second one, a sandy one, still in the rocky library, but looks like sand or some kind of a light soil. I combined the two using a blend 60% mode, using the slope mask. By doing that, I got this purple color on the rocks while retaining this sandy looking soil for the rest of the terrain. I then added another set map, this time a very red-orange set map. Same thing for the soil, I connected to a mixer, multiply. Now with the mask I use the rock map inverted mask, this one. Okay. Now the reason for that, or the multiply I mean, is because if you take a look at the map before, now this is what we have before, what we had, and now we have this. It's the rocks are darker and they look more realistic. The next mixer, I basically combine the same map, this red one, with this mixer, and we have this result here. This is what I call the multiply blend technique. Basically, you first use a mixer set to multiply to darken the rocks, using obviously the rock map as a mask, and then you connect another mixer combined with the same map, but instead of using the multiply, use the blend mode. You can set it to a value which you like, in my case 70%, same rock map as a mask, and now we have this nice coloration going for the rocks. As you can see, we retained some of those purple looking rocks while having those more realistic red rocks. Now another mixer, yes, this is for the flow of the soil. I think I used, yes, a white set map. I usually use a white or blue set map for my flow. and as a mask I used the secondary flows from my flow node. So we have this result here, a method sqrt. Sqrt, it's like divide, but you don't get color shift, you only get the whitest colors, and you don't get artifacts. The next mixer, basically I combined this mixer of our secondary flows with this reddish setmap, and as a mask I used the tertiary flows. Now by doing this you break the shape, you break the uniformity, and it becomes more interesting. I use the power method. You can also use the blend method or multiply, depends. Ratio 20% because power is very powerful. As you can see, this is what we had, which is nice, looks very artistic, but also realistic. And this is what we have now. It's darker, and let's zoom here. As you can see, we have more contrast in these areas where the rocks are, while retaining those nice flows. So it looks way better overall. And let's take a look here on the plates. Here we have the flows, and this is with our power method. As you can see, more contrast, just better to look at. Now, color effects for color correction. In this case, just a little bit of contrast. I lowered the saturation to give it a more realistic coloration, and increase the lightness, because if you increase the lightness when you have those flows, the details will pop up better. Equalization 2% to avoid RGB artifacts. Finally, our lake. Lake is just a mixer node with the second input set to the clutter portal, which is the color of the lake, and for the mask I used the lake's output, the blur. And this is the final result. Of course, if you want a very realistic crater, you can go for it, but for my style, I prefer this kind of coloration and this kind of terrain features. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video. If that's the case, leave a like to support the channel. Subscribe to stay up to date with the latest content. If you have any question, comment below, and I'll see you in the next one.